So you want to ace your behavioral interview questions and stand out from the crowd. You've come to the right spot. This video teaches you an improved STAR method with interview questions and answers you can learn from and practice yourself. In this video, I'll teach you a tried and true method that improves upon the age-old classic for answering behavioral interview questions, the STAR method. At this point, everybody knows how to use the STAR method, so if you want to stand out from other candidates and demonstrate that you are the right person for the job, keep watching. Welcome to the Pocketboard channel, where accomplished industry mentors share their hard-earned, lessons learned, guidance, and mentoring tips to help you navigate your current professional goals. My name is Erika, and I'm a former Google hiring manager and an interview coach. Landing my dream job at Google almost 10 years ago changed the trajectory of my career, and I mentor people to help them land their dream jobs because I know how life-changing the right job can be. As an interviewer, I've been on the other side of the table hundreds of times, maybe even 1,000. I've learned what works and what doesn't work when it comes to acing job interviews. I've mentored and interview prepped almost 100 people who've gone on to land their dream jobs at top-tier companies, including the super tough FAANG companies. In case you aren't familiar with behavioral interview questions, they are a type of interview question where the interviewer will ask you about your past experiences. Behavioral interview questions are designed to learn how you have responded to certain situations in the past to get an idea of how you are likely to respond to similar situations in the future. The truth is, there are a lot of people who know how to do the things you know how to do, whether it's project management, engineering, marketing, or something else. However, we all know that the people who thrive at work aren't just good at the hard skills of their job. They are usually very good with soft skills as well, and these soft skills make them more successful in the workplace and more pleasant to work with. These skills include communication, collaboration, giving feedback, having resilience, handling ambiguity, and many more. Behavioral questions are designed to help you demonstrate these soft skills. The STAR method is a framework for answering behavioral questions that helps you, the candidate, ensure that your answer is structured and covers all of the information that an interviewer needs to gather to properly assess your soft skills and your fit for the job. People have learned the STAR method, and now interviewers expect you to use it when answering behavioral questions. This is a good thing because the STAR method is easy to learn and easy to remember, and it helps both the candidate and the interviewer give and get the right information, and it gives you the best chance of a fair assessment. However, for most companies, the STAR information isn't enough. I'm going to teach you a modified STAR method that will help you land jobs at top-tier companies. These top-tier companies are the ones that have the ability to be more selective in hiring, so the interview bar is usually a bit higher. These companies know that it takes more than a strong combination of soft skills and hard skills to make the ideal employee, and so they're looking for more information than what we can glean from the STAR method alone. Let's take a step back. Think of the best person you've ever hired or interviewed if you aren't a hiring manager. Someone probably popped to mind fairly quickly, right? That person was almost certainly good at the hard skills of their job. They were also almost certainly good at the soft skills too. You were sure they would be successful in the role based on these abilities, but I bet they also had one additional ability. That ability isn't an ability at all. It's a mindset, a growth mindset. The best employees I've ever hired and worked with are those who are living, learning growth machines, who will stop at nothing to be better tomorrow than they are today. These people tend to be receptive to feedback, self-driven, and self-modulating, and they tend to make for exceptional long-term employees because they're always looking for ways to improve their work, their teams, the products they work on, and even the business itself. As a company, I want to hire people who want to get better every day because they're more likely to improve my business outcomes. As a hiring manager, I want to hire growth-minded people because they are receptive to feedback and they're self-regulating, which makes managing them a joy and a fun experiment to observe and be a part of. As a team member, I love working with growth-minded people because they inadvertently push me to improve myself and they make our team better to work on every day. Assuming you agree with me about the importance of having a growth mindset, I'll teach you how you can adapt your STAR method to demonstrate your own growth mindset. The STAR method is an acronym that stands for Situation, Task, Actions, Result. It's a linear communications framework for answering any behavioral question. And you start by describing the situation, then you explain your role or your tasks in the situation, and then you share what you did to resolve the issue of the situation. Then you share the results, which are hopefully positive for you, your team, and the business overall. Once you've answered a behavioral question with the STAR method, you've expressed a number of your soft skills in a real-world situation, which for some companies, that's enough to move forward to hire you. But if you're hiring a competitive employer with a lot of applicants, you'll want to stand out from the crowd. You can do this by demonstrating your growth mindset. So, after you finish the STAR method, rather than pausing or ending with a wrap-up question, keep going. Tell the interviewer what you learned from the situation. Try to share something you learned that you've actually adapted in future work. Share what you would have done differently, and then tell the interviewer how you've adopted this lesson learned into your future work. If possible, follow up by giving them an example that demonstrates those lessons learned in action. When you share this example, use the STAR method, but be highly concise. Adding those two pieces to your STAR response adds demonstrable evidence of your growth mindset. And what makes it so magical is that you're answering all of the interviewer's follow-up questions without them having to ask. And you're telling the interviewer yet another success story in your career, where you were successful because you grew and evolved and improved. I call this method the STAR++ method, and I've taught it to over 100 people who then used it to land top jobs at top-tier companies. So, in summary, STAR++ is situation, task, action, result, lessons learned, and how you've applied those lessons learned in a real-world example. I'm going to do 2 examples with STAR++ so that you can hear examples with this improved STAR method questions and answers. The first question I'll answer is, tell me about a time when your workload was overwhelming. I was a technical program manager building the first ever medical device at Google. My team was fairly lean and I was the only non-engineer, so anything that wasn't engineering work was generally on my plate. This was always a bit overfull, but I was usually able to prioritize and avoid overwhelm. One day, a pharmaceutical partner wanted to use the device in a clinical study they were running, which meant that my team would be able to get a huge boost to our learning and ability to develop our product. We agreed to work with the partner, so they set a date to come and audit all of our engineering documentation, of which we had none at the time, because we were early in product development and we hadn't started it yet. After savagely prioritizing all of the work needed before the audit date, I knew there was still too much for one person to do, and it would be a huge risk for the team if I took it all on. I also knew I needed to avoid taking resources from our lean engineering team, so I came up with a plan to hire contractors and use other Google resources on a voluntary basis to handle some of the more straightforward work, leaving myself with only the work that could only be done by me. This moved me from the first chair flute role to being the conductor of the orchestra, and it gave me a much better perspective on what needed to get done, by whom, and by when. My job shifted from doing the work to planning and staffing the work, and then ensuring that everyone had everything they needed to complete their deliverables on time. When the day of the audit came, the auditors were impressed by the level of detail and the amount of data and engineering design work we had done. We passed the audit with no issues from our partner. This meant that our devices could go into their first ever clinical study, and it gave us significant real-world experience and data that propelled our product development forward. The volunteers and contractors I had hired all asked to continue working with me and my team. That gave us confidence in my ability to delegate, to hire, and to motivate a newly formed team. This was really my first time assembling a team and rallying them around a mission, and it taught me a lot about how to get buy-in from people, especially volunteers, and also how to quickly assess and vet contractors for fit, especially when the role is highly ambiguous. One thing that was difficult was that I didn't always make the right calls when I hired contractors, and during the project I did let a few go. Each time that happened, I did a mini retrospective to identify where I went wrong in my assessment process so that I could improve my assessment framework and become more efficient in the future and ensure better fit for contractors who were joining our project. Since then, I've built many more teams, often under much less pressing circumstances. But I always start by setting a team mission and a vision to ensure that we're all aligned at the highest level, which is, what is our purpose? Setting a team purpose makes the tactical decisions much easier, including setting things like an assessment framework for bringing on new team members. I'd be happy to dive into any areas you'd like to discuss further or answer any follow-up questions you may have. Okay, let's talk about what I did there. First, you probably noticed I hit all the points of the STAR method before jumping into what I learned and how I've evolved since. You probably noticed that I spent about as much time on the STAR part as I did on the plus, and you may have noticed that I tend to combine the S and the T into one segment where I provide the context of the situation, including my role, all at once. I tied the lesson learned to a future successful project, showing that I actually used my lessons learned. Okay, let's do one more. The second question I'll answer is, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss. Okay, this is a tricky question. I'll probably do a whole video on how to answer conflict questions, especially with your manager, because there are a lot of ways to trip up on this type of question. So for now, I'm going to answer this question with STAR++, and then we can discuss some potential trip hazards in our debrief. In my most recent role, I moved into a chief of staff position where I was responsible for organizational planning, including our headcount plan and reporting out our internal budget and costs to our parent company. When September rolled around, I was asked by our parent company to have an annual plan ready by December so we could align on our budget. My boss was used to having more of an ad hoc planning process, and he was uncomfortable with the idea of taking so much time and putting so much upfront effort into an annual plan. I knew that I had been hired to tackle exactly these kinds of efforts, and just because my boss wanted to have better planning and organizational strategy didn't mean that he was ready to make these trade-offs or make big changes in the way the leadership team handled planning. I needed to create a win-win. So I worked with the parent company to understand their goals and to suss out the minimum information they needed for their decision-making processes, which turned out to just be the annual budget number and a breakdown of our costs, of which our largest costs were people-related costs like salaries. Then I met with the other leaders on my team to understand what was working in their minds and what was not working with the old way of doing planning. Nearly all of my peers aligned that we needed an approved headcount plan by January 1st because hiring takes up to 2 quarters. So they wanted to start the year with an approved hiring plan so they could kick off recruiting on time. In our case, our largest cost center was people cost, so I realized that rather than overwhelming the team with this big, nebulous concept of annual planning, I could reframe it around the creation of a hiring plan to be finalized in December so they could start hiring on the 1st of January. This also satisfied the parent company's needs of having our annual plan. I pulled together a process, some tools, and a few alignment meetings to create the annual headcount plan. The headcount plan was the largest cost driver, so once it was created, I was able to get our parent company signed off, which meant the headcount plan was approved, and I created a pretty lightweight planning process, which in my boss's mind was a win-win-win situation. We were one of the first companies hiring after the holidays, so we landed a few key hires quicker than ever before, and both my boss and the rest of the senior leadership team were delighted at the hiring plan outcome, and they were grateful that annual planning had been so painless. That year, we ended up hiring 80% of our plan, which was up from about 60% in prior years. And this was all because we started hiring on time. What I learned from this experience was that I always need to be selling. I found out that even when people want something to happen, they still need to be sold on it, especially if it changes their routines. I wish I had spent more time selling my boss on the new headcount planning process. Even though it ended up going quite well, I think it could have gone even better. In my last role, I was at a growth stage company with very nascent processes that needed to be upgraded. For example, adding access controls to people data to ensure that only the correct individuals within the organization could have access to sensitive people data. This may sound simple and obvious, but it's actually complex because people build their workflows around data and systems. So when you need to change their access levels, this can actually disrupt their work significantly. In particular, in this case, I needed to remove access to some sensitive people data that the HR personnel were relying on to do their work. I took the same approach, finding a win-win for everyone, but this time I took extra time to ensure I was selling the new features that would come by making the system changes that we needed to protect the data. In the end, we secured our people data and actually made the HR team's work much easier. The upfront selling and mapping needs is really what made this go so well. I'd be happy to dive into any areas you'd like to discuss further or answer any follow-up questions you may have. Okay, let's talk about what I did there. First, You probably noticed I hit all the points in the STAR method before jumping into what I learned and how I've evolved since. You probably noticed that I spent about as much time on STAR as I did the plus plus, and you may have noticed, again, that I combined the S and the T into one segment where I provide the context of the situation all at once. You noticed I quantified the result with some numbers. This shows that I'm data-oriented and results-driven, and I tied the lessons learned to a future successful project, showing that I actually grew from the lessons learned. Easy peasy. So now it's your turn to practice. I put a slide at the end of this video with a number of practice questions, and they'll be in the video description as well. I recommend that you hop on a video call with yourself. Record yourself asking the question and then answering it using the full STAR++ framework. In an interview, this all needs to fit into 5 to 7 minutes, but first you need to focus on the content before you worry about making it concise. After answering 3 to 4 questions, take a break. Come back in 45 minutes. Time and time again, I coach people who've only ever answered behavioral questions in their heads or by writing their answers down. Remember, it's an interview, not a college essay. You need to practice it in the same way you will be interviewed, verbally. After you come back from your break, put on your interviewer hat and assess yourself as you watch the recording. How clear is your situational context? Did you use the structure well? Did you quantify the results? Was your story the best story you could have picked? Were you compelling as a growth-minded candidate? Do this many times until you have the framework nailed down and until you, as an interviewer, are ready to hire yourself on the spot. Remember, you need to be your toughest critic and ensure you're improving every time you practice, but also remember to be your biggest supporter and cheer yourself on when you start to see yourself improve. Congratulations, you've learned the improved STAR method, which I believe is much better than the current STAR method because it demonstrates a growth mindset, something that is critical and important for top-tier employers like FAANG companies. So to recap, here's my proven framework for how to answer behavioral interview questions. First, give me context. Then, tell me what you did. Then, tell me what happened as a result. Share what you learned and end with what you do differently and what you have done differently in future situations. This framework shows that you handled the past situation well, and it gives me a lot of confidence that you would handle a future situation expertly. You now know a proven method for how to answer behavioral interview questions that is far better than the STAR technique and will help you stand out. Practice this method on all of the questions listed here. I've included a few different common flavors of behavioral interview questions, and you'll see that the framework works on all of them. Once you get to a point when you are organically using the STAR++ method framework without having to refer to the framework definition, you have mastered how to answer behavioral interview questions, and you are well on your way to landing your dream job. If you want me or other Pocketboard mentors to create more helpful videos, subscribe to this channel. To get new mentoring tips faster, make sure you ring the bell and you'll get notified when we publish new videos. Please drop a comment in this video to tell us what mentoring tips or skills you want us to cover in our next video. I'm Erika G, and you can find me on Pocketboard if you'd like one-on-one mentorship and coaching with me.